Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 30th of October 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio behind the technical desk is Mike Robinson, and we will be joined by live video link by David Scott from Northern Exposure. Well, first of all, the weather. It's dry and overcast in southeast London. That's the latest update. Persistent rain in Norfolk, pretty rainy, mizzy here in Plymouth. And Manchester, I'm not quite sure what they've got. I think they're calling it a yellow ball in the sky, so presumably that's good news. And of course, if the sun is roughly shining in Manchester, that must mean that global warming, climate change as it's also known, is on the way. Well, thank you very much to the person who pointed out that at least President Putin seems to be on the ball when it comes to the scam of climate change. And in the Global Warming Policy Forum, there's some pretty interesting comments. The title here is Russian President Believes Global Warming is a Fraud to Restrain Developing Nations. Well, that's a pretty powerful comment, but in the text, encourage people to go to Global Warming Policy Forum and have a read. President Putin had said this: warmer temperatures would mean Russians spend less on fur coats, and our agricultural specialists say that our grain production will increase, and thank God for that. David, I thought that was a really wonderful statement there by David Cameron. Not only does he simply... Oh, Putin, I beg your pardon. Why did I say that? It's because we're going to come on to David Cameron in a minute. Putin totally debunking the climate change myth, and he's also thanking God for his grain production. I think he knows something.
If only, Brian, that's the sort of comments we got from our own Prime Minister, we would be much safer. I was looking at some figures this week. The increase in fossil fuel use, the rate of increase in fossil fuel use, about 1992 went up by 300%. There was a step change as China became a major industrial economy. There was a step change in the rate of increase of fossil fuel use. And it's interesting to compare it to the rate of increase in carbon dioxide, which did not change at all. The carbon dioxide has been driven by climate change, not the other way about.
Interesting times. If only, you said, if only we had a Putin, we'd be a lot safer. Well, that's a very nice introduction to this one, which is a very detailed report in Veterans Today. And again, I'm going to encourage people to go and read it. It's how Russia and Syria turned the tide on terror. And there's quite a detailed analysis of the Russians' tactics in Syria, which has meant that in a matter of weeks, they have subdued this so-called terrorist threat. Well, of course, we know what's really going on. These are mercenaries paid for by Britain and America. But a detailed analysis of just how clever the Russians have been and how closely they've worked alongside the Syrian army in particular in order to completely outflank the terrorists. What is beautiful about this bit of analysis, of course, is nothing like this appears in the BBC or mainstream British press. We simply pump out the dross that appears out of our own Ministry of Defence and out of the White House. It seems to me that Putin has really upset the Western agenda of terror, and I understand also that Iran and Iraq are now very, very close to saying, well, Mr. Putin, will you come and give us some assistance to get rid of the terrorist element? What's your thoughts, David?
There was a time many, many years ago when small countries threatened by larger ones used to volunteer to become part of the British Empire because they realised that we represented the best hope for safety and liberty. Sadly, it's no longer true. We seem to be now representing a foreign policy that spends its time making excuses for why Russia keeps moving its country closer to our military bases. and why the hospitals in various parts of the world seem to be in the wrong place because they constantly end up under falling munitions. It's very sad that our political leadership has fallen so far, but you have to admire the fact that Russia, despite its Soviet past, which was horrific, is now perhaps regaining its position that it once held and seeing itself as it once saw it, as I suspect they view it very very clearly as a Christian country that stands for truth and against the West, which I imagine they view as highly degenerate.
Well, I would certainly agree with that comment. And on the subject of degenerateness, what better place to bring in this man? Slightly falling out of the picture here. When I tried to load this BBC video, I only got the this top quarter frame coming in, and I thought it was pretty appropriate. I mean, David Cameron is beginning to look more and more empty. You look at the eyes, you look at the expressions, what's actually inside this man. Well, what was the BBC report all about? It was what Mr. Cameron has been saying about our relationship with the EU, and apparently the UK is to opt out of the EU's commitment to ever closer union, restrict access to in-work and out-of-work benefits to EU migrants, give greater powers to national parliaments to block EU legislation, protection for the City of London financial markets from EU legislation. Well, as I read through this, what was apparent to me is it doesn't matter what the people in Britain want. This is all about David Cameron. David Cameron says, David Cameron wants. This is the David our King Cameron dictatorship. And I've got to say that we know that he is building the European Union with his hands, while of course he's denying it with his mouth. This is sheer hypocrisy, lies, spin and deceit. He's renegotiating, or is he building greater integration? What's your thoughts?
The dominant characteristic here is one of incoherence. Every policy we have seems to be in outright and frequent conflict with every other policy we have. We are claiming to be searching for peace in the Middle East and doing nothing but destabilizing countries, funding and arming some very shady groups, and bringing more and more death and destruction in our wake. We claim to be renegotiating our membership of the European community, when really everybody knows you can't negotiate. You can only negotiate transitionary terms. You just have to take it or leave it. That's the nature of the European Union. Are we really going to change that? No. No, we're going to have to face the reality that we either stay or go. And what we're doing just now is a sorted lies and deceit. It's about time that we were honest, that the politicians were a little bit at least honest with us, and we could have a mature discussion about who we are as a people and what we should be doing.
Well, one of the things that I feel, personal comment, I feel we will come away from the European Union, but the objective at the moment is to make sure that this country is absolutely destroyed as a power base. This is what's going on with the infrastructure. This is decline of the armed forces. We are to be wiped out as a nation, and then I think simply pushed to the side of the European Union project. So that's the way I see it going. Other people may have a different view, but what is clearly happening at the moment is that we are seeing this country simply pulled apart now by David Cameron, previously, of course, by the Labour Party, Lib Dems hiding in the background, but they're part of it. But destroy Britain, remove its power and influence, and then allow the European project to carry on as it wishes. And of course, the protection of the City of London is interesting in there. Wherever you go in your research, the dirt, the criminality, the muck, the policies seem to be coming out of the city. Gog and Magog, maybe.
Indeed. What we're seeing is that there are certainly rules and rules. There's one rule for the City of London and one rule for everybody else. People talk about not bailing out industries, and industries have to stand on their own 2 feet. I'm all for that. But we've now got a steel industry that doesn't actually make financial sense, even if everybody it employs worked for nothing. Now, this is nothing to do with cost of living. It's nothing to do with productivity of labour. It's to do with the cost imposed on that industry by government taxation and the cost imposed on that industry by government regulation of power generation, something that Mr. Cameron referred to as that green crap. This has made our steel industry completely uneconomic. We've got a steel industry which is very high investment, very high capital investment, and now a relatively small employer. So wages are not the issue. It's not anything that we can't compete with China because, they're bashing out low value bits of plastic at, two penny a piece. That's not the nature of the industry we're talking about. It's very high tech. It's hugely high investment. And we've got this thing called the City of London. It's meant to be the great powerhouse of the world financial system. Well, it doesn't help us. It's not generating investment into our industries. It's not generating a situation where these industries can compete. So it's then all the more strange to see that when it runs into trouble, then and only then do are the gates of heaven opened and money showered from government coffers into the banks to bail them out. We didn't let them fail. We should have let them fail. And they now know they can never be allowed to fail. They will never be allowed to fail. There's no restriction on what they do as a result. And this is not good for the country because having a country based solely on selling pensions to one another won't work.
Agree. Well, we just come back to Mr. Cameron because I think some of this is just incredible. He was asked whether Britain was better off out or in the EU, and he said there's a debate about Britain's membership of the European Union. That's why we're having a referendum, and people will be able to listen to all of the advice and all of the positions that they hear before making up their mind. So what this arrogant man is saying is that the British public, I think it's 42 years now, I might have done the figures wrong, but it's a long time, but the British public is too stupid to understand the EU after all this time, and we have to wait until we hear other people assessing whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and particularly what David Cameron's opinion is. Whereas we know if you go anywhere in the country at the moment, get people in a debate about the European Union, the bulk of the country knows it's rotten, still hasn't produced a signed off audited set of accounts, but we've got to wait for David Cameron. I'm going to say sheer arrogance. And of course this was happening in Westminster on Wednesday, was it now? That's right. And this was the Royal Marines protesting at the imprisonment of Royal Marines Sergeant Alexander Blackman. Surprise, surprise, the BBC failed to report the demonstration in any of the main TV bulletins, including BBC One News, sorry, that should be news at 1 p.m, 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. And I just wanted to bring in, of course, that who is responsible for Mr. Blackman being in prison at the moment? Well, it's David Cameron. David Cameron is the man responsible, and he has let this thing go through. And then, of course, the other thing that's going on is all of the Royal Marines that attended in uniform are apparently going to be fined. They're going to be put through disciplinary procedures and either fined half a day's pay or given extra duties to do. But we never, or the mainstream media is never actually putting up who's responsible. Who is responsible for this? David Cameron. So he attacks the military, he attacks Britain, he lies over what he's doing with the European Union. Despicable. But remarkable that we've also got an attack going on BBC's Mr. Yentob. And all of the information spewing out now that he spent £85,000. So this is information that's been known for a very long time. Why is it all coming out? Well, of course, Mr. Yentob has been backing kids company Camilla to say that the accusations are not true. Now, we're watching a lot of comment over the internet at the moment. The point we are interested in is there was no attack on Kids Company until Kids Company presented David Cameron with the list of high-level political and VIP child abusers, including satanic ritual abusers. And within a matter of days, massive attack comes in on Mr. Yentob. Just a quick comment, if you like, on that one, David, and then I'm going to move on through a couple of other things, and we'll move north of the border. But BBC under attack, or Mr. Yentob under attack?
Well, anyone who reveals the nature of paedophile and satanic ritual abuse in this country seems to be under attack. We're seeing that more and more. We've seen Tom Watson come under attack. We've seen Simon Danczuk come under attack. We've seen Zach Goldsmith come under attack. If you speak out on this subject, they will get you, seems to be the message. And the nature of the subject is right-thinking people, that small remaining part of right-thinking and well-doing in this country will speak out anyway, whatever they do.
Yeah. Well, of course, we can't find the high-level sex abusers, but now we've got a problem on the London streets. The Guardian reporting here that there's been a spate of sex attacks in South London. And my goodness, well, the police swing into action. So the report here, they believe that the series of sex attacks in South London are linked. 8 women have been assaulted in Clapham in the last month, forcing police to raise patrols. Well, we were very puzzled about this because, of course, what a ridiculous thing for the police to do. Why do we know this? Well, of course, it took the boss of the National Police Chiefs Committee, Sarah Thornton. Previously, she was running Thames Valley Police, but she said a couple of days ago that patrols do not help cut crime or make people feel safer. So we've got the chief of the National Police Chiefs Committee saying, well, it's no good raising patrols because that's a complete waste of time. But what have the police done in Clapham? They thought it was a good idea to get more police out on the streets to protect women. There's something interesting going on here. Is this a deliberate lie by this woman, or is it ignorance, or is it something else? Has she had her mind changed? We remember that she's a common purpose future leader. Something wrong.
Well, if you sever the link between performance and getting reward, now she's very well rewarded, however badly she performs. If you sever that link and you then work on the worst aspects of human nature, you will get the situation where you will have more and more cost will produce less and less protection in the case of the police, or more and more cost will produce less and less health in the case of the NHS. So you have a situation where the incentives become very skewed. So you end up with more bureaucratic, less efficient system, and a lot of vested interest, a lot of salaries who want to maintain that. It ceases to be about protecting the public, and it becomes about protecting the police force and the police force salaries. And the public are left out. And I think it's an example of that as much as anything else.
What we do know, though, of course, it's destabilising our trust in the organisations we need to protect us, and makes life difficult for the police to police themselves. Well, we picked another example where we think it's interesting to have a look at what's going on. The Mail's picked up on the fact that the Service Prosecution Authority has reopened this case. Now, this is tragic. This lady eventually committed suicide. She said that she'd been raped by two corporals. The army investigated and then said insufficient evidence. Well, that case has been reopened. Many people are saying, and quite right too. And we just wanted to say, isn't it interesting that the Service Prosecution Authority can actually revisit and do its job? So it said, right, we are going to investigate to see what the truth is about the rape allegations. But the Crown Prosecution Service just can't do that. So we've got Melanie Shaw here, suffered horrific abuse and rape as a child and as a young woman. What has the Crown Prosecution Service done for her? Well, they've prosecuted her and put her in prison. And of course, what they're failing to do at the moment is prosecute her rapists and abusers. So again, we've got this business. The armed forces, the pressure can come on the armed forces. If we have a look at what's happening with the Crown Prosecution Service, well, they get a bit confused who's committed the crime and who the victim is. I'm just going to ask you again: is it my imagination here, or are we starting to see a breakdown in common sense and serious decision making?
Yes. Decision making is exceptionally poor, and you could express it as common sense, but it could be something much deeper than that. I mentioned before how the policies seem to be incoherent. Well, if there's no coherent philosophy, no coherent belief system at the core of it, then where do you go for your policy? Where do you go to have a steer? Human nature being what it is, without anything else, it'll go to naked self-interest. And if you have a system which advances, as you've pointed out, very low empathy people, you're going to get naked self-interest on steroids. You're going to have people abused by the system more and more. I was looking today at a case in America where a well-connected and extremely rich man raped a 12-year-old girl so severely that she was in a coma for 5 days and in therapy for 10 years. The evidence was cast iron. They found the girl's blood on the man's underwear. He got a very good lawyer. You may have heard of her. Her name is Hillary Rodham Clinton. There was mistakes made in the lab and they lost some of the evidence. Miss Clinton managed to get him off with a 1-year sentence down from life, which is what it should have been. And there are apparently lots of tapes with her laughing about the errors made by the labs. You're talking about very low empathy people here. You're talking about people who have no moral code. You're talking about people who are only in it for themselves. And this is the sort of person we have running the country.
Well, let's look at this. Bearing in mind your comments, let's just have a look at this. We were given this article. It's Vox Political. Again, I'm going to say to people, please go and read this article. Council Finance Chief to investigate workhouse scheme. And the basic story is about a former bus depot in Blackburn, which is going to be used for recycling and supposedly bringing homeless people back into society. But Vox had been asking some questions about it. It's been reported in other sources as well. So this is the Lancashire Telegraph. And this is the charity that's involved, which is called Recycling Lives. And I've got to say, I find that title particularly creepy. Maybe just me. But this is what the Telegraph had to say. It says Recycling Lives is trying to assemble a financial package to make its ambitious plans for Blackburn a reality. The charity's associated social enterprise would run the site as a recycling centre for items such as metal scrap, tyres, plastics, televisions and redundant household items. The money raised from selling these items would provide the homeless and others on the margins of society with training, education, work experience and employment. It'll also provide accommodation for up to 10 workers who would otherwise be homeless or sofa surfing. Now, we're not saying that the charity has done anything wrong. We're just highlighting for people this is going on, and what does it really mean? Well, if we come in from this angle, this was a couple of the points from Vox, from Political. They said this: homeless people could then be paid the minimum wage and be topped up by the local council paying housing benefit, which would be paid to the charity for them to live on a recycling site. And the second point which I decided to pull out was the charity website of Recycling Lives even talks about these homeless people being farmed out to other companies, and those companies paying the wages they would have paid to Recycling Lives, so that money coming back to Recycling Lives. Now, this is the comment from Vox Political. We tried to get some comment from the charity itself, but they were all in a meeting apparently. But when you phone the charity, you listen to a recorded message boasting that they came into being as a result of coalition government welfare reforms. Well, here we are, welfare reform white paper. This is taken off the charity's own site. Coalition government's welfare reform white paper has been unveiled in Parliament today by Work and Pension Secretary Ian Duncan Smith. He said, your contract is, if you're unemployed, work with us, do what you have to do to look for work, apply for work and take work. If you do not, there'll be a series of different sanctions that say, look, you're not helping, you're not working with us. So that was the hard line from Ian Duncan Smith. We then get the charity on the back of it saying, here they are to recycle things, make money and help people socially. But if you look at it in black and white terms, Ian Duncan Smith, do as we say, or you can recycle waste. And where does this idea come from? Well, actually, this is big society. The integration of charities and social enterprise in society is David Cameron's big society, and that is communitarianism, which we're calling communism light. So a low empathy Ian Duncan Smith person there, David, and we don't put people into apprentice schemes, we put them into recycling.
Yes. I'll need to look at that more. That's very interesting. It sounds like servitude. It sounds like being a serf. There was a point where if you wanted to go to the New World, to America, you would find yourself in bonded labour for a set number of years until you'd paid off your ticket over the Atlantic, and then you'd be free to go and live your life. It sounds like a move to something along those lines. This idea that you've got this organisation who's benefiting financially from someone's work, and what are they providing? They're providing a vehicle which gives access to government money, which is only money stolen from other people who are working. Charities in this country fall into two categories. You've got the ones which are run on a shoestring budget and are only interested in helping people, and you've got the ones where there's a lot of fat salaries and they are, in practice, an extension of government policy. The word charity puts everyone to sleep and means that we don't give them the scrutiny they need. So the first question is, how much is the running cost? What's the salary cost of this? Are there any people who are sitting there earning £75,000 to £100,000 a year in order for organising the work of these people who are at the bottom end of society and are looking for a way back in? Now, work is the right way to approach that. I saw some statistics a while ago that this related to America, but it'll be very similar here, that if you finished school to sort of high school level, you refrained from having children out of wedlock, and you took a job, any job, and didn't leave it unless you were moving to a better job, your chances of being in poverty were extremely, extremely low. It was less than 5%. So you have a situation where work and a certain approach to how you live your life is what's necessary. But what is this? Is this giving people a chance, or is this exploiting people? I think it bears further scrutiny.
Yeah, we need to delve into that. Well, let's go north of the border, and the named person scheme has been doing well, it seems, and you've produced a couple of clips here of No to Named Person at the SNP conference, leafleting. How successful was that then?
It was very good. I mean, the one conference is the SNP conference, and the second one is actually today
Sorry,
at
beg your
the
pardon.
Scottish Labour
Yeah.
Party conference. So they're getting around most of the political.
Oh dear. Okay, we seem to have lost some video connection at the moment. Are we still, if we're still live, we're just going to try and re-establish that connection. And David will be covering the Scottish Government getting a little bit panicky over some questions to do with the named person scheme. So on screen at the moment, you've got the Kay Adams programme, and this is where the debate took place.
Well, why don't we just play that that clip? Because basically what happened here was that Kay Adams was interviewing the relevant minister in Scotland with regard to the named person scheme. And what was quite interesting is this is a little 2.5-minute clip, and about halfway through, the minister starts to come under a little bit of pressure. And there seems to be some strange whispering in her ear as if she's being prompted, which could be overheard in the background. So we'll play this, and hopefully by the time we come back, David will be back online.
Can we let the Minister respond to that then?
Well, the legislation, the Children and Young People Act, puts in place that we have to ensure the well-being, the holistic well-being needs of children, and that includes things like being included, whether children are nurtured and safe. And so I'm quite relaxed about it, because I actually think that most families, most parents will want their children to be happy and will want people who are interacting with their children on a day-to-day basis to make sure that those children are happy and learning and are able to learn in a nurturing and caring environment. So I actually think that's quite a positive thing.
But Aileen, to pick up on what Simon is clearly going on here, I mean, that is a very, that is open to interpretation, well-being, isn't it? And nurturing. These are very subjective terms. So the named person's view of whether a child is being adequately nurtured or is happy enough could potentially be very different from their parents, couldn't it?
Well, I think as well, though, that the teachers who are working with...
Couldn't it? Just answer me on that.
Well, the reason we've got it in legislation, the reason we've got it within the Act...
Could there not be a difference of opinion between the named person's assessment and the parents?
Could be, but however, that goes back to whether or not we have
so
robust
who has the final say?
Well, the parents,
the parent or the named person?
The parents are always the best person to look after their children. But this is again goes back to the kind of understanding that this is an entitlement for families to go to if they need support.
We're talking about a statutory system whereby, you know, families will have a named person in their lives, whether they choose to or not. And I totally appreciate what you're saying. They can choose whether to access it.
Yeah,
but if that named person, decides that the child's well-being is not being best served, in their professional opinion, do they have the final say?
Well, no, not unless there's a child protection issue.
Right. Okay. So only if there's a child protection issue.
Because parents are always will almost always be best placed to know what their child needs. However, the named person service will always be having a good relationship with the parent, and will talk and discuss if there is a well-being or an issue with that child, then that will affect its learning and in performance in the class. Okay. So there will be a kind of open dialogue.
Leslie just wants to come in very briefly. You've got 30 seconds.
On your government website, you can't even describe what well-being is. You say it's a complex, multifaceted construct that's continued to elude researchers' attempts to define and measure it.
Well, we set it out within the indicators, Shinari indicators.
But you can't define it, measure it.
It's set out within the wellbeing. There's wellbeing wheels. There's different local authorities have different approaches.
Subjective assessments.
No, it's within legislation. It's defined.
I do apologise, Minister. I'm afraid we are coming to 11 o'clock and we have to stop.
So, Brian, David's back, but I mean, basically, there were two main points out of that, David. One was that initially the minister was saying the parents are always best placed to make decisions about children, but later on she was qualifying that somewhat by saying almost always best placed, and then we come on to the whole issue of well-being and the fact that they have no definition for what this is.
They have no definition, and you I'm sure picked up on the waffle that came out when pressed on a definition. What we have is the Shinari indicators, which is a way of assessing it. So we can assess it, but we can't define it. And every council will have their own method of assessing it. So we can assess it, but everyone's assessment will be different because we can't define it. And then based on this thing, which we can assess but we can't define, we will decide whether or not you are a satisfactory parent, and we will start to impact on your family to correct your failings in ways which we can't define, but we can assess. It's a nonsense. And also we've got this, you heard the whisper, the child protection. Well, the child protection is the excuse. It's the reason given for everything. Because people accept, rightly or wrongly, that government has a role in protecting children. Certainly the law and the people of this country have a role in making sure that there is no violent crime perpetrated against children. Now, they take that, which everyone agrees on, and it's morphed into this other thing, which is well-being. So well-being subsumes everything else, and we have to intervene early. The basic concept behind this is we're going to intervene early. We're going to intervene before it's a problem. So it's pre-crime. How do you know before it's a problem? Well, some special professional person has a gut feel that something happens that they don't feel quite comfortable with, and they start to investigate. And that is a child protection issue, or it might in future be a child protection issue. Therefore, there's a gut feel, there's a worry, someone doesn't like something about you as a parent, and it can be anything, because well-being can be anything. It's anything from any cause that concerns the named person, and the named person decides. And ultimately, the issue is one of authority. Who has authority? And remind people here that if what happens now in Scotland, if you have a 13, 14-year-old girl becomes pregnant, right? So that's statutory rape, and goes to the NHS will inform the named person, not the parent, the named person. The named person will then decide whether or not the parent is to be informed, right? So it's quite clear who's in charge. It's the named person, it's not the parent.
David, you produced this home education forum clip, as it were, which I'll just put on the screen. Now, don't worry, the text is very small. I'll read a little bit out, and then we'll highlight the pieces we need. But essentially, the person is saying, before the holidays, the kids were visited by a Childline worker, ostensibly a presentation to make children aware of Childline and what it does. She spent 30 to 45 minutes with her 4 classes of P6, P7 children from 2 local schools, 2 of the classes being bussed in for the occasion. So this is NSPCC getting into the schools to teach to talk to the children. And then in that text, it says this: they went back to school last Thursday, and when our not quite 11-year-old daughter got home, she told us the teacher had pulled her out of class and said to her, "You're not in trouble, but the head teacher has said, I have to ask you if you're being abused or being hit at home," or words to that effect. And the parent comments, "It turns out that the Childline worker had flagged our daughter up as being at risk on the basis of how she answered the question, what constitutes abuse? Not the words she used, but her tone. Quite how she did that with no one-to-one interaction in less than an hour in a class full of kids, we're at a loss to explain. We're also still not clear on exactly what it was that caused this reaction." So here we have exactly what you're talking about, which is we've got NSPCC, my favourite charity, as it were, going in to teach children how to be safe. And then what happens? A big wedge driven between the child and her parents.
Yes, and imagine that, I mean, that's obviously a home where there's very good communication. Imagine a child's going through something that a lot of teenagers go through, where the parent parent-child relationship becomes a bit rocky and communication breaks down a little bit for a while, quite a normal part of growing up, you start factoring these sorts of questions in. They can go anywhere. And it's based on a gut feel, nothing.
It's based on a gut feel, it's based on nothing. But what we can see continually coming up, of course, is the language. And if we follow language back, it leads us to very interesting places. Now, you picked up on this group, Hopscotch, another charity. It's a theatre company going into schools to teach children, from my reading into the site, about being Scottish, giving them a helping hand with history and key Scots over the years. Here's some of the values: participation, inclusive learning, keeping up to date with hot topics, employing Scottish-based creative talent. So this is very nationalistic. Maybe that's not a bad thing, but who gives them these other topics? Who feeds in these other topics? I think I got a clue when I looked at the site, but what did you pick up with these people?
Well, yes, these are obviously people who are getting the funding via the education authorities by selling these services to schools. And what are they selling? Well, they're selling what the government wants to sell to children. So they become a mouthpiece for this. And they are, amongst other things, going into schools and teaching the children songs about Shinari, which is the indicators of well-being, and the rights of the child. The rights of the child being whatever the government decides at the moment the rights of the child are. And certainly they don't talk about the rights of the family. So they are very much spinning a pro-government line into family life via the schools.
Well, we would agree with you on that, but a little bit of work actually took us to another extremely interesting place, which is the UN. We might have to save that for another time. But the policy that's being taught the children, of course, coming straight through Scottish Government, and you encouraged us to go and have a look at Scottish human rights, which I did. Unfortunately, when I put in Scottish human rights, I got an error. Presumably that means there isn't any Scottish human rights, or there's been a slight glitch. Well, we did find it eventually, and here is the page. And excuse me a moment. We've got a document, excuse me, which is all about human rights, and it's set out in beautiful Newspeak language. Encourage people to find this document themselves. We're going to have a better culture, better lives, a better world. We can't deal with unemployment or child abuse, but the SNP already working on a better world. And this is the language. Through this participatory approach, SNAP has gone beyond a traditional action plan with a tick list of actions to become a collaborative process to bring about sustainable culture change. So your culture is going to be changed, and I think it's actually going to be changed through Newspeak and collaboration, but it is changing pretty quickly, David, north of the border.
Well, I'm looking here at the Scottish Human Rights Commission annual report, 2014-2015, and it's got a glossy cover with a map of Scotland. On it is written all the things that this organisation believes in and is there to defend. It includes family life, it includes freedom, it includes privacy. Now, given we're interested in family life, freedom and privacy, how many times do you think they mention the Children and Young People's Act and the named person provided for every child in Scotland in their annual report? Would you believe zero? It doesn't even warrant a mention. This is the organisation which is claiming to be looking after human rights in Scotland, and it's not. The biggest attack on human rights in Scotland doesn't even get a mention. Is it possible that this organisation is in fact receiving large government funds and is therefore simply parroting what the government wants us to believe? I would suggest it is.
Okay, David, it's just incredible the speed this thing is unfolding. So while we've got the government saying it's promoting human rights, of course, what we've seen with the Sheikh Obeyo incident is the complete opposite. Now, you have kindly provided us with a little video clip of a man singing about Sheikh Ubeo. We've decided we'll play that out at the end of the news programme. So that will come up, but I'll just bring on screen the YouTube location. So it's Langtoon Film, and we've put a couple of the sections of the word there. I believe it is in a very strong Scottish accent, which means for Southerners like me, it's impossible to decipher.
That's maybe putting it a little strong. I come from not far from Glasgow, and it's a Glasgow accent, so I thought it was fine. But one or two others have said that they found some of it a little difficult to follow. The chap is a very thoughtful young man, I would suggest. His name's Dominic O'Hara. And when you listen to the words he's singing, not only is it of some musical worth, but the analysis that underpins it, it's not simply an emotional response to what happened to Sheikh Ubeo. It's also an analytical response. And he talks about the fact that it's all a gang and it's called democracy. And he talks about what we need to be looking for is truth and justice. And this is an extremely important point he's making here, because democracy, when you get right down to it, is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. Because a majority vote for something does not make it true, a lie remains a lie. These words have meanings beyond what people vote them to mean. Because a majority vote for something does not make it just, right? Because our political system has looked at, for example, the Holly Gregg case and all of the paedophile assaults on children by people in high positions of power, and says, there's nothing to see here. We're then expected to believe this and accept it. We're told these lies and we're told the truths. And we're saying, well, we live in a free society. You have democratic rights. Therefore, what results must be truth, must be justice. Therefore, you can have no cause for complaint. This is a lie. And this young man in his song shows and recognises that it's a lie.
Well, David, I will be listening to that again. We're encouraging people to get onto YouTube and find that clip and listen to it. Of course, the subject, unbelievably serious, the death of this young man in police custody. And according to this article, he was fighting. It's an article putting him down. So just let me finish this little bit.
Sorry.
And who was the man promoting the put down? Well, it's Peter Watson, who was Eilish Angelini's original solicitor, man embroiled in Heather Capital. We just highlight him. Here's the man here. The man who threatened Robert Greene in a legal sense and UK Column in a legal sense. Pretty nasty piece of work, it seems to us. He's now defending the police and helping break down the reputation of a man who's dead. This is pretty sick stuff.
It is. He's published via the Herald newspaper, and the Herald newspaper is the Scottish National Party, an establishment organ now in Scotland. There's very few things they won't print. He's published via the Herald newspaper a press release which lists 10 questions which will lead to the truth, as they say it. And these 10 questions are 10 leading questions, each of which are an assault on the reputation of Sheikh Ubeo, each of which try to paint Sheikh Ubeo as a violent thug, each of which tries to paint the family as somehow being in the dock on this. The family have done nothing wrong. The family have no questions to answer. It's appalling. It's a dreadful piece of journalism, to put it out. It's a dreadful piece of PR spin, because any right-thinking person will look at this and will be appalled by it. And in terms of the Police Federation, these are people who are meant to know the law. There's an ongoing PERC investigation. We have the Lord Advocate of Scotland calling on everybody to cease making comment on this case and allow the investigation to proceed to its conclusion. And we have the Police Federation putting this type of garbage, and I mean garbage, gutter journalism, out into the world. It is a shame on them.
Well, we'll add this bit to it, because this is Mr. Anwar, who's been saying that people have been suggesting that if tasers had been used, the death could have been stopped. This is diversionary argument, of course, but it's saying CS, batons, cuffs, 9 cops, isn't that enough? And they want tasers as well. It's quite frightening, the implications for this case. Death in custody. Does the truth come to the surface straight away? No, the state starts lying and covering up.
Yes, I mean, we have a situation here where we had the suggestion that's come from Peter Watson and others is that there was one tiny little PC who was getting beaten to death and she was saved in the nick of time by the cavalry. It's not true. There was a large number of police there. Sheku Bey was not a large man in any case. There was more than enough people to deal with any and all eventualities without excessive force and without anybody failing to go home at the end of the process because they are dead. And the suggestion that what we need is more torture devices in the hands of our police force is just ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, on that note, David, we'll finish our news today. Some very serious stuff going on right the way across the country. What do people need to do? They need to understand what's happening. If you're awake to what it really is, start talking to friends, family, neighbours, get the word out there. And I think we also need to challenge the people bringing this dreadful policy in. It doesn't happen by accident. We have politicians bringing the policy in. And of course, they are being fed by a civil service which has now been utterly corrupted in a political sense. It's up to us to stop it. We know where they're going, our lives, that's one aspect. But of course, the state is now clearly after the lives of our children and grandchildren. So there we are. It's up to us. Can we do something? Yes. Speak out. Get out of that armchair and do as much as you can, however little that may be. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back on Monday, same time. Bye-bye.
Where are you now? Where have you gone? Sheku Bayo, Cocody man from Sierra Leone. Not let me bring my guitar. Fifth of the May of Sunday, 2015. I am to the story of another name between. 9 police arrest a man and come to the ground with batons and handcuffs. He made us Sheku Bayo, the family man was all I know. The police come, try to run Sheku Bayo. Stephen House at the top, just the same as every other cop. Violence, silence, it's always been their way. Don't believe a single word they say.